Hello and welcome to Design Dispatches, where today I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the Canadian designer Bruce Mau. I say designer, actually. He's described as an amalgamation of designer, philosopher, curator, author, artist, educator, visionary and philosophy. He set up a design practice in the 1980s, but I think sprang to international prominence in the mid-90s when he published with Rem Koolhaas a book called SMLX-XL. 3 years later came his incomplete manifesto for growth. And most recently, now in fact, we have Mau MC24, 24 principles for massive change in life and work. Bruce, I just wondered whether we could start with this book. And actually, I wonder whether this was the completion of the manifesto or the incomplete manifesto for growth, or is completion an impossibility in design?
No, it's really another chapter. I think about the incomplete manifesto really as a way of trying to understand how do you sustain a creative life. So not for the short term, but really for the long haul. It's easy to be a hot designer for a season. It's a whole other thing to sustain a really creative practice for your lifetime. And that's really what the manifesto was about. The principles of MC24 really came out of an invitation by the RSA in London to be an honorary royal designer for industry. And as part of that process, they sent a group of young leaders to Chicago for a meeting, to come to the studio and visit. And so I showed them what we do, and they said, "Wow, you're a really weird dude. What kind of designer are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm a designer. This is what we do." And they said, "Well, how do you do it?" Because we think of design being defined by the product, that an architect does buildings and a graphic designer does two-dimensional things. But you're doing social movements and institutions and brands and businesses and carpets and cities. How do you do that? And I was a little bit irritated. I said, "Look, I just showed you. You should have been paying attention." And they said, no, you showed us the results, but not the process. And I realized that I actually didn't know how I did it. That it had evolved over a 30-year period, a 25-year period, and I really hadn't written it down. So I tried to understand what are the principles that I could really teach anybody or give to other people. And to ourselves, into my own studio. What are the principles that would really help us to produce that kind of range and quality of work?
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, Bruce, because the book itself is beautifully produced by Phaidon. It's our book club this month at the Design Museum. It's something I've chosen. I think it's fascinating. It appeals to me. I know there's a massive amount of interest in the friends and patrons of the Design Museum, but I wonder who you're aiming the book for. I mean, it's such a global position in all sorts of details. Do you believe that our political leaders may actually take notice of something like this? Is it aimed at them as well as everyone else? Is it aimed at the profession?
It is. It really started from a concept that we call design for non-designers, and it really starts from the first principle, which is first inspire. Design is leadership. Lead by design, which starts from the premise that we have an extraordinary power to envision the future. I mean, the common denominator amongst all design is that you're producing a future. I mean, it may be only a slightly different future, a new lamp or, but you are envisioning a future, and with that future, a way of life. So everyday designers are designing our way of life. We're designing how we're going to live in the future. And so that leadership is really the method of design. So here you have, in some ways for the first time, a method of leadership, not just an anecdotal, encouragement to be a good leader, but really a way to do it. And that was really what we started with. And so for me, the audience is designers, of course, because we can all advance our practice, and there are fundamental changes happening in our practice of design that take us to a much more comprehensive, holistic way of thinking about design and the impact of our work. But it's also making it accessible to anyone who is trying to advance, advance life, advance what we call life-centered design. Really, helping live on the planet in a way that is compatible with the rest of life.
I was trying to explain what it was to someone, and my summary in the end was, I said, well, it's a kind of intellectual self-improvement book for the planet. But of course, you do go into a lot of specifics, and as you've articulated, the range of your own approach and practice is everything. Carpets, social programs, books, cities, the whole. So, what about expertise and specialization? In this country, our politicians have told us, and now they're reining back, that we've had enough of expertise and specialism. How do you, which is a kind of nonsense, but how do you, reconcile's the wrong word, but how do you bring together the idea that designers need to be across so much? It's a kind of collaborative practice, but at the same time, we need depth and expertise, don't we? We need people who know a huge amount about very small things.
Yes, there's no contradiction in that.
No.
There is a challenge in developing both sides of your brain. In other words, you need expertise. That's your gift to the team. And if you think, we talk about what we call Renaissance teams, that we can't have a Renaissance person anymore. The bodies of knowledge are simply too vast. But you can have a Renaissance team. And a Renaissance team is assembled with people of different expertise who bring a different perspective to that problem and connect us to a body of knowledge that allows us to get to great solutions. But to be a Renaissance team player is a special kind of methodology and practice. You need to be an expert. You need to develop and take responsibility of your gift to the team, which is deep knowledge. But you need to be open to collaboration and hearing the voices and curious about the rest of the world. Curious to hear other perspectives. So in the book, we actually itemized the kind of 7 behaviors of a Renaissance team player to help people really think about, what does it mean to work that way?
I find it inspiring, but quite daunting, because there's a huge amount of things that I need to be or take on board. But I think your point about curiosity and openness to other ideas is critical. I also think your point about one of the 24 principles about fact-based optimism is really nicely put. In other words, it's not utopian idealism and we have a blind leap of faith. You analyze information, data, the situation you find yourself in, but there's still grounds for optimism. Does the pandemic still instill that feeling into you? This must have been conceived before all of this happened.
It went to press a few weeks before the pandemic hit. And I have to tell you that when the scope and scale of the pandemic became clear, I called the publisher, I called Phaidon and said, I'm going to look like an idiot. The book is radically optimistic. And I really think we should, I need to look at it again. And they said, no, first of all, it's already at the binder. It's too late for that. But you shouldn't change it. This is exactly what we need. And I said, look, I'm gonna take a look, and I'm gonna look and see how each of the principles applies to the pandemic, and I'll know if that works, then it's right. And I did that. I wrote an essay on that subject, and it was really satisfying to, their response was, this is exactly what we thought would happen. But for me, the pandemic actually draws us and challenges us to our best. The greatest challenges demand the highest purpose and the highest really effort and commitment from us. And in some ways, this is maybe the kind of greatest challenge we faced in a few hundred years. So it's really quite extraordinary And we will need all of the principles. We will need fact-based optimism. We will need design leadership. We will need every principle to be applied if we're to succeed in overcoming this challenge.
One of the other points you make is, for the introduction, is that about time, that things have got to change significantly now, is what you say. And the pandemic seems to have reinforced that view around the world, that whatever people's political or ideological position is, people understand there needs to be a significant, rapid response to the situation in which we find ourselves, and the status quo no longer is good enough.
It's a big question in my mind, because I think that once we solve this, the pressure to go back to what we used to do and just return to a lot of very stupid practices, I think will be tremendously great. And one of the things that we've done in the process is create a new studio, which is Bruce Mouth Studio, and that studio really is dedicated to that kind of change. Right? To say, let's really put together the expertise, the network, and the global commitment to the kind of change that we need to make.
Of course, change and rapid change and exponential growth, which is something you talk about in relationship to Ray Kurzweil, the American scientist and thinker, also underpins the economic model of late free market capitalism. And there is an analysis now that says, again, whatever one's position, that mass consumption and the idea that economic growth exponentially is inevitable and desirable, that's questioned, isn't it? I'm not saying that again is a paradox in your book, but there's a complication there at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the impacts of the pandemic, one of the few positive effects, is that it has allowed us to see that things can change, that things that we thought were permanent and fixed and never ending can actually stop, and we can start doing things differently. And I think that opportunity of a moment where we kind of unlock possibility is a really powerful opportunity to really make progress. And I think that the urgency to make progress has never been greater. I mean, the calamity that we face if we don't change what we do is really significant. I mean, it's unpredictable what the impact of that will be.
You talk about money as a design tool, which is interesting. You can sketch with money, you say, and you say people should design your own economy, that actually design permeates not just product, but system schemes, including the economic systems that govern the world.
Most of design thinking over the last 20 or 30 years has been about, and longer in some ways, has been about a kind of discrete object. So imagining a problem cut off from its implications. So we could take a problem, and in some ways the best design brief was a single word. So it was kind of like pressuring it, pushing it down to a single thing, as if we could take that problem out of the world and solve it. And so we developed a methodology, collectively in design, of a one-to-one relationship of problem and solution. Right? So we're kind of locking a solution onto a problem and trying to make that fit as perfect as possible. We had no interest in the implications, the environmental impact, the human impact, often the economic impact in some cases. We just solved that kind of falsely discrete problem. And what we're saying in the development of what we call life-centered design is that's the wrong direction altogether. We need to go the other direction and make the brief as complex as possible, as comprehensive as possible, to understand the economic and ecological impact of the things that we're doing. In accounting, they developed a concept called externalities. In other words, if I can't solve it in my equation, in my spreadsheet, I just push it outside. I call it an externality, and I don't have to pay for it, and I don't have to solve it. When you work globally, you realize there is no externality. There's nothing exterior to our environment. Everything counts. So we may not be adding it up, but the world is, and it's keeping tabs, and at some point that bill is going to come due. And the only way that we can really hope to have a long-term future is to design in a new way. It's to really think holistically about how we fit into a global ecology and economy.
Design for all the senses, you say, which is both a collective idea, but you're a sensualist as well.
Well, I realized that almost all of our design tools are for the eyeball, for one of our senses. And I've been working with Freeman, a company that produces live events, live experience for several years now. And I realized that mostly we still design objects for the eye, when in fact the real product of our work is time. It's really beautiful quality time. And our competitive advantage is that we have the full experience. So in this case, we have two senses. But if we were in a room together, we would feel the room. We could taste things, we could touch things, we could smell things, we could really experience in a much greater bandwidth that exchange of ideas. And so we need to develop a new kind of tool set for the senses to really think about, what does it smell like? I mean, most conferences, when you go to them, smell like off-gassing. That's probably not what they had in mind.
I love that. There's also empathy, though, which I think digital communication like this instills. It's not that I'm imagining what you smell like, but that room that you've got, well, I am, but that room that you have that's covered in books, stacked with books. And I love the fact that you end the book, this particular book, by saying, work on what you love, and that books are the love of your life. So I've got this sense of books, old books, new books have a lovely smell, a different kind of smell. And there's the tactility of a book, the physical manifestation that I like. So I suppose empathy plays a sort of role, but I like that. I like that idea of bringing all the senses together. You're right, and the primacy or the dominance of the eye is overstressed, I think, in our world.
Yeah. Yes, we did an event with Freeman where we blindfolded the audience and took them through an experience of the senses, and people were crying. And then, a woman came up to me after and said, "I discovered that I have ears." and it was. I mean, what you realize when you put the blindfold on, you have only one center of attention, and all of a sudden you can move it around, right? Because as long as your eyes are open, the dominant sense is vision.
It's a very interesting, well, there are many interesting points in the book, but one of the 24 says, compete with beauty. That's quite confrontational. I thought, that we should harness or work alongside, but I'm not Bruce Mao. So why should we compete with beauty, not work with it?
Because beauty is one of the most powerful human forces. Think about what we will do for beauty. We will go to the end of the earth. We'll suffer. Pain is not a problem for beauty. We'll pay more for beauty. We'll move to another country for beauty. We'll go to the ends of the earth. And what I realized is that almost no company I've ever worked for has a beauty strategy. And in fact, if you were a student in an architecture school today, and you put up your project and you said, "I did it because it's beautiful," you would get an F. We don't teach beauty.
Nor
You
in
don't,
art schools either. It's a dirty word in rigorously
yeah,
critical art schools, which I salute. But the idea that beauty is something to be afraid of, or it's superficial or trivial, isn't it? Is
yeah.
the perception.
When in fact, I mean, it's changing the world. I mean, if you think about Apple and take the beauty out of Apple, first of all, you probably would have never heard of it. Secondly, it's a reasonably good technology company, but you put beauty into it, and it's the most valuable company in human history. And so, in the chapter Compete with Beauty, we say, look, beauty is a competitive idea. You need a beauty strategy, and you need to understand the dimensions of beauty. You don't have to get a master's degree in design to understand the core concepts of beauty, that contrast, material, form. I mean, these are, you can learn about the basics of beauty. If you think about contrast, every client I've ever had wants to be in the foreground against a noisy background. They want to stand out. That's contrast. So if you can understand the concept of contrast and how it gets produced, you can produce contrast, you can get the impact that you're looking for. So it's really kind of giving people access to what the kind of dark arts of design have known for a long time.
The book is beautiful, I think, unashamedly so. And I have no doubt, Bruce, that it's going to be phenomenally successful. But I like the fact you wrestle with and don't seem afraid of failure. That actually what we can learn from failure is really interesting. I mean, I've always wanted to do an exhibition about failure in design, failure in art, and maybe you're the person to do it with. But failure and always searching for the worst. Let's end on that pessimistic note, and you can give an optimistic twist to it.
Okay, let's start with failure. Failure cannot be avoided and should not be avoided. In fact, it should be embraced and brought into the process. What you want to do is eliminate them as quickly as possible. So we develop a method that we call sketch, which is low resolution ideas, fast and cheap. You want low resolution, you don't want to invest a lot. You want them fast and cheap, and you want to be able to look at them and share them and get them off the table if they don't work. So that methodology of sketching is really central to succeeding in that way. And then always search for the worst is really a search for where the value and opportunity are. In other words, if things are good, you don't need a designer. If things are bad, you need a designer. If things are terrible, you need an awesome designer. the worse it is, the more you need design. So as designers, I've had a studio for a long time. Often in the studio, it would come up, why don't we work for Apple? And my response was, Apple doesn't need another designer. They're already the best in the world. Think of all the places that are the worst in the world. That's where the biggest opportunity is. That's where we add the most value. That's where we can have the greatest impact. And if you think about the challenges that we face today, the challenges are new challenges. They're what I call success problems. We have more problems because we succeeded so often. If we had failed more frequently, we'd have fewer problems. But we have a new order of complexity of problem that comes when you succeed and you now have 8, 9, 10 billion people. These new problems are vexingly complex, desperately urgent, and the biggest opportunity in human history.
Given that you publish major books roughly every 10, 15 years, what will success for you in terms of MC24 and the principles you outline, what would success realistically with fact-based optimism look like in 15 years' time for the planet?
Well, I think what we're exploring is really how to put these into the hands of as many people as possible. So now we got them, and that was a major effort. That was 10 years of torture, but we got them. How do we really get these into the hands of people as quickly and cheaply as possible.
I see it now, Bruce. I was going to use the phrase intelligent design, but that has all sorts of connotations. But you, as a kind of secular philosopher, preacher, going around the world, preaching the principles of MC24, but in a sense, that's got to happen.
Life-centered design. Life-centered design is really like, you know, I'm part of I'm on the board of a new architecture school in Northern Canada. And it's a tricultural project with French, English, and Indigenous leaders. And so I've been going up there twice a year and learning from them. And I realized that their cosmology doesn't put humans at the center. They put life at the center. And we come to life with all the other life forms. And I realized, gosh, that's the destination that I've been searching for. And so we're developing a practice of life-centered design, which is really, you know, thinking outside of ourselves of the welfare of all of life as our practical objective, as our purpose.
Just when I thought I got my head around things, you chucked that one into the mix. Bruce, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Fantastic to see you.
And you. Stay well.
Thank you.
That's the next book, isn't it? Life-centered design. I mean, it's in here as well, but that's great.
Yeah. No, Tim. What we're working on is actually an institute for life-centered design.
Which will be where? In Toronto, or will that be in Northern Canada?
We want to do it in a new way, which is really technology enabled and networked. So it won't be in a single location, but really allow people to join and work this way from anywhere in the world.
Really good. Wonderful. Yeah. And it won't require, I mean, you talk about conferences and the way they smell. Well, in the future, they'll smell often where you are in the world because people will stop going to as many as they did before, won't they? That's a fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great, Bruce. Thank you. That was a treat. And
thank you.
Congratulations on the book. That's great.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheers. Take it easy. Bye.
Thanks so much for everything. I mean, I echo Ellen's comments that I was really blown away by your comments. I mean, really appreciative.
Heartfelt, but thank you.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thanks, Bruce. Bye. Bye.